All right, I think we are live here now. That's right. So we're gonna start in here. I'm gonna stand right here and I'll be on the camera. All right, hello, good morning. We are live this morning from the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis, taking a look at the new Dorothea Lange exhibit, Changing Views. So I'm very excited to have some great guests today. First, we're gonna have Dr. Jessica Nelson, who is, do you want to tell us your title?
Sure, I'm Director of Religion and Culture Initiatives here at the Eiteljorg. I work in the curatorial department and helped oversee this exhibition.
Excellent, so thank you so much. I'm really excited to talk about this. For me personally, Dorothea Lange is my favorite photographer of this era because I think her work it has the perfect combination of what I love about photography is when you have documentary work that's poignant and relevant to the time, and also it's very beautiful work too, which sometimes I think people feel a little bit funny talking about documentary work and subjects like the Great Depression, making beautiful art of that, but I think if anything it makes people stop and look at it longer. So is there any kind of intro to, well, we've got so much to see, so why don't we just start looking, and then absolutely. You can kind of give us an intro to things as we go here. So I'm gonna turn the cameras around to some of our photos here, so bear with us. I will be taking questions throughout, so if anybody has any, just let us know. And also if anybody has anything about the sound or anything like that, let me know. When I move, it might take me a second to adjust cameras, so, but I'll try to keep it quick for you guys here. So can you tell us about where we're starting off here?
Yeah, sure. So the initial few photographs that you see in this exhibition come from Dorothea Lange's personal work before she really entered into documentary photography. She had just such an amazing life and such an inspirational story. I love the relevance of her, her life experience has become, I think, so much more relevant because her childhood and young adulthood was marked by experiences with pandemics and disease. She had polio as a child, which left her with a permanent limp. And she moved to San Francisco. She was born and raised in New Jersey, New York City. Moved to San Francisco, well, unintentionally moved to San Francisco. She was attempting to travel around the world with a buddy of hers, they were both in their early 20s, I think, and then they got pickpocketed in San Francisco. So that's where they stopped.
Oh man, that's a bummer.
She was already a photographer. She had worked in a couple portrait studios, like as an assistant in New York City. So she got a job at a department store, or at a drugstore, developing photos. And within a couple of weeks kind of integrated herself into the photography community.
That's awesome.
As a young woman, she opened up her own portrait studio. That's what she spent the first decade or so of her career doing. Her first marriage was to the Western painter Maynard Dixon.
And this is him?
This is him,
okay, that's great. I've never seen this print before. I did a quick walkthrough and there's a lot of prints here that I had never seen before. So I think one of the things that, and definitely expand on anything as we go along here. So she set up her portrait studio in San Francisco around was it 1925 or so?
A little earlier than that, maybe 24. Yeah.
Okay, and so she was the one supporting her family for I read about 15 years. Her husband being the painter, and they had 2 kids, and she was the breadwinner. So is this from her portrait studio?
I think I don't think we have any prints of her portrait photography, but this was from that time period.
The time period, okay.
Some of her first kind of outdoor photography, that family relationship. That's her husband and her son, their hands together.
Okay.
And I think, her relationship with Maynard was interesting. Like you said, she was the breadwinner. He would go off for a couple of months and go do his paintings and show up again. But he did kind of introduce her to the art world.
Okay.
She was
okay.
pretty hesitant to call herself an artist for a long, long time. There's probably kind of gendered reasons for that.
Sure.
It's easier to. She wasn't trying to kind of stake out a claim, a competition with the big dogs.
Yeah.
But he did kind of help her circulate in that world. So this is a very early example for photography, 1923.
1923.
One of her first kind of outdoor prints or outdoor portraits, unposed-ish. I mean, that's pretty
Yeah, as
close
much
up
as you
view.
can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, different from the like directive style that you might have in a portrait studio.
Okay. Very cool.
So yeah, Maynard Dixon would go on, these painting trips to New Mexico, Taos, out west, and so she kind of followed along a couple of times and began to document what he was seeing and what she was seeing too.
That's awesome. So some of the early kind of documentary stuff. Let's hop over here to the camera. This would be the type of camera she was using.
Yes. It's a slightly smaller version. She usually used a 4x5" camera. And the closest we could find was 3.5 by 4.5, so a slightly smaller model, but this is the type of camera that she would have been using. She would have opened up that top lid for viewing and kind of looked down into the viewfinder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would she mostly, I mean, you see the big, larger cameras when she would have been shooting, would most of the time she'd been on the tripod?
Yes.
Yeah, and so this is pre kind of that mobile documentary style from, the 35 millimeter cameras.
Yeah, exactly.
So just to do another, I'm going to do a quick pan across here. Reintroduce here, we're at the Dorothea Lange exhibit at the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis. We're talking about some of the photos here and doing a preview. And if anybody has any questions or anything, feel free to ask. I'm monitoring the live stream here. And so we're gonna kind of move through here. We've got some, there's a few other photographers from the era in this exhibit to kind of give some perspective. And then also we've got some contemporary photographers represented here. And one of them, Wildstyle Paschall, is here today to speak with us too, so we're going to make sure to get him in. So let's talk about this photo, because this one was an important image for her. Hey, so from Brazil. Hi, thanks for joining us from Brazil. That's exciting.
Welcome. This image is called White Angel Breadline from San Francisco in 1933, and it represents kind of a turning point in Dorothea Lange's career. She, the Great Depression was kind of sweeping across the nation at this point, and as she retells the story, she was actually in her portrait studio, looking out the window, seeing these crowds of men gathering, and this in particular, these men were waiting for a free meal, basically. The White Angel refers to this generous benefactor in San Francisco who would just serve a free meal once a day. And so she found herself kind of carried out, or she felt compelled to kind of go out and document the scene. She took this image, developed it, and then hung it in her portrait studio. And folks would kind of come by and ask her, like, what are you going to do with that picture? Why is it on your wall?
Yeah.
But eventually she sort of gained her reputation from that. I do think even though she describes this one moment as a turning point, I think she had begun to turn towards that a little bit before. And the reason I say that is because she changed her advertising of the portrait studio the year before in 1932. It had been portraits in photography had been what she advertised, and then she began to change it to pictures of people. And I think that change is significant, that she was no longer creating portraits, but she was taking pictures of people.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah. Now, this had been something that other people had seen published and kind of led her to the
FSA?
Yes, the FSA,
yes,
thank you.
Security Administration?
Yeah.
Yes, so eventually she started taking kind of more and more. I think she took there was a rally for a workers' strike the next spring, and it was actually Willard Van Eagle, whose work is also displayed, was kind of a more established commercial photographer. He had some of her images in the window, and then actually she met the man who would become her second husband, Paul S. Taylor, was a sociologist at Berkeley, And he was going out and kind of documenting the plight of unemployed farm workers statistically and with interviews and writing these reports, and he saw her pictures and realized the power that they would have.
Sure.
So he actually hired her to accompany him on his research trips. She was listed initially as like a typist and secretary because there was no money for a photographer.
Sure.
So she just like signed on to that, and then he was kind of in those circles of, you know, the FD, the Roosevelt administration, and sort of all of the different government initiatives. And the FSA, the Farm Security Administration, had created this photography division in 1935 as well to try to document the Great Depression and essentially help generate public support for a lot of FDR's kind of initiatives.
That's great.
Yeah.
So also another hello. Hi from Malaysia. Thanks for joining us here. So just to recap every couple minutes here, we're at the Dorothea Lange exhibit at the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis, Indiana, looking at the work of Dorothea Lange. So we're still going through. Now, we've got a lot of stuff to see, so I'm going to kind of move, you know, somewhat quickly through some of these. So how was pre-FSA, was this all basically like self-funded?
Yeah.
So she was doing all of this out of her own pocket. And then what year would she have started with the FSA?
In 1935.
35. So we're getting close to it.
Yeah, I think some of these are, for sure, I know like the next image, Filipinos, and actually I think this southwestern picture, but for sure this was the FSA.
Do you know, I mean, did people who were photographing for the FSA, were they actually making enough money to live off of while they were doing this work?
I would have had the numbers for you at one point. They're out there, but yeah, she was making. She was kind of hired with a yearly salary.
Okay.
I know since this is Women's History Month in particular, I know she had one of the lower salaries, equivalent to some of the male photographers that had much less experience than she did. But yeah, she did receive a salary.
So we're going to get here into the Migrant Mother, and then we'll go, why don't we talk about this, and then we'll go bring Wildstyle into the chat here. Sure. So we've got the famous Migrant Mother, and you know, everybody's seen this photo, and this is what really, I mean, would you say after this was public, like, obviously the photo was very well known.
Yeah.
Was her name closely attached to it at the time? Did people begin to learn about who she was?
Yeah. She certainly, this kind of helped her break into the ranks of renowned photographers, I would say. It is interesting that because she took this photo as an employee of the FSA, it's in the public domain.
Right.
So anyone can go to the National Archives website, find it. You can print it or do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
Which was something that she found frustrating. Later on in her career. But that's an interesting. It's an interesting conundrum to think about. That part of the reason, I think. I mean, the image is powerful and compelling and amazing. But part of the reason why it's become so well known is because there's no copyright limitations on it.
That's true. That would be, tough for a photographer to have something that's so broadly used like that. And for anyone who doesn't know, so the images that she took when she worked for the government are available on the Library of Congress website or is it the National Archives? Is that the other?
Yeah, the Library of
there?
Congress has most of her Farm Security Administration photography. The National Archives has a lot of her Japanese internment and Japanese American incarceration camp photos.
So something that I really find interesting about that is that, let's get in closer for a look at this print. Something that I find interesting about that is it's worth going on these websites because for nothing else, you can download the images in very high resolution and get a real close look at everything. Because I'm looking at this here, and you can see the texture, in the clothing. And I mean, how much would you say this is? like how posed do you think this is? Because there's a series of what, 5 images?
7.
Oh, there's 7 images.
Yeah.
Where you see her moving closer, and then it kind of looks like she's in different positions.
Yeah.
Do you want tell us about that?
It's such a fascinating series. So it's interesting. This was a little bit. It's a little bit of an exception to Lange's typical approach because she often spent a couple of hours at a site photographing. In this case, she was only there for about 20 minutes, and she took 7 images total, which is crazy in this world of like modern digital photography to think about like literally 7 frames. And yeah, she started. If you want to actually show this poster as well, she started farther out. A little bit more distant. Florence Thompson is the woman being photographed. She had an older daughter, and like pictured here in this image. Yeah. Lange, I think, was a little bit concerned that there would be confusion over whose children the younger kids were. So she decided to focus in on Florence Thompson. And then one of my favorite little things that you get to see in this exhibition is we included in the original print, or in the original film negative, Florence's thumb is visible, holding onto the pillar. So we know that Lange like directed the children to look away from the camera to frame Thompson's face. I think there's some of those elements of her work as a portrait photographer kind of come through in this moment. But yeah, Lange went back to the negative and retouched it and erased the thumb in like 1937 or 38.
There's a lot of work to do.
Right? Yeah.
Do we know, I've heard a lot about this photo. Yeah. And one thing that I'm curious about is what is speculation and what has been documented. So like some people I've heard say that, that one of the images she was nursing the infant, and someone said that they would have had directives they wouldn't have wanted to show that type of thing at the time.
That story I'm not as familiar with.
See, that's why I wonder how much is actually documented versus how much that is. So I always kind of thought it was mostly people reading into what they thought with some of these things.
She could have been in one of these far off pictures. It's hard to tell, but maybe she could have been nursing at that point in time. Yeah. Baby looks pretty sound asleep, in my opinion.
Right there,
at this point, but.
So, yeah, that's interesting to me. Well, let's walk through over to the contemporary part of the exhibit. I'll kind of reintroduce things as we go through. Sure. And then we'll bring Wildstyle in here too. So we've got, to refresh for any new people, we're at the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis, Indiana, and there's a Dorothea Lange exhibit. We're taking a walk through today. I'm going to swing over here, actually. We're going to get back to this one. This is one of my favorite photos of hers. It's so beautiful. I love seeing this giant print of it. Very cool. And they have some contemporary photographers here, too, who have kind of continued in on this tradition in documentary, social justice, photography. So when we get back to this part over here, we've got some of Lange's contemporaries here. So we'll talk more about that, but let's move into this part here. So let's get Wildstyle here. So I've got this framed up. We'll kind of stand by your thing here. I'll step in there with you. Let me turn this here. Okay. So I'm gonna, you can come in too. Sure. I'm going to change my mic here so we can get Wildstyle on here too. This is a handy little transformer.
In the meantime, shall I introduce?
Yeah, go for it.
We are so happy to have with us Wildstyle Paschall, one of the contemporary photographers that we've been featuring in this exhibition, Indianapolis native, and has a million jobs to his name, hip hop producer, photographer, social justice advocate, and we're so happy to have you here with us this morning.
Thank you.
So can you tell us just a little bit about your path from like how did you end up getting to photography, and then specifically like what got you started really going into doing social justice, documentary type of photography?
So I managed hip hop artists, not as much today. I have one left, but I managed hip hop artists, and we were starting to get them more shows and opportunities to perform. But as the manager, I needed photography to help promote them and the shows. And I really wasn't getting that, not stuff that I thought was promotable. So I said, you know what, I'll just do it myself.
Yeah.
I was getting just stoic poses of them holding the microphone, pretty much the way I'm holding the microphone, and that wasn't telling the story and didn't entice people to come out. And so I learned that. I had a lot of fun doing that, and I soon realized that, wow, like I can kind of change perceptions of what's going on in our local hip hop scene. I can take pictures in the neighborhood and take pictures of good stuff going on in the neighborhood and other events and other cultural aspects of the community that, the news just wasn't covering. So that was kind of what got me down on the path. I ended up going to protests. I went to community events and everything, because I enjoyed taking pictures.
Yeah, I love that story. I mean, I've heard so many talented photographers getting into it for like this almost utilitarian, like I need an image to show this, and nobody's doing what I like, and so I'm going to, I can think of so many people that have, then it kind of ignites this spark and drive and getting into other things. And so when you first started doing more photography, did you have any particular, influences and people you were looking at, either, contemporary or historical?
So I'm somewhat self-taught. The University of YouTube, I would describe it as my teacher. So I didn't have as much background on a lot of photographers, but one particular one, I had seen some of Dorothea Lange's pictures, and I didn't know who she was, but I saw the pictures and remembered, like, yeah, that's what I'm going for in street photography or whatever I'm capturing is to grab people's attention. But also Vivian Maier.
Yeah,
I had watched a documentary on her and looked at her galleries and was just amazed. I was like, that's the type of photography I want to be involved in that shows culture and everyday life and real people where you can understand it 50, 70 years from now.
Yeah, it's kind of like universal moments and things like that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this photo from May 7th, 2020?
Yeah, so this was, in the fairly early days of the pandemic, and this is a protest, but this is weeks before the George Floyd protest nationally happened and the uprising in Indianapolis. But at the time, this was the day after the Indianapolis police shot and killed a young man on Michigan Road. And there was a rally the next day. They had a lot of, I would say, older speakers there that were basically telling them in indirect and indirect ways to go home, you made your point, but this isn't it. And so they all got off stage and the rally was over and the young people got together and marched through downtown unbeknownst to anybody. They marched through downtown for almost 2 hours, taking over the streets. And it was a peaceful but civil disobedience protest. And so I was there with my camera. I stuck around and I wanted to make sure that I captured it because oftentimes, the media doesn't always get the full story. That they make it seem like, well, these aren't normal people, or they're from out of town, or stuff like this. But these were some of Drayshawn Reed's friends, and people had signs, and they were demanding justice.
Yeah. Do you find that? How do people feel about your presence as a photographer at these sorts of things? Are they generally like, you know, of the mindset, we know you're here to help spread this message? Do you ever face people that are like, no, please don't take my photo?
Sometimes I get people that don't want their photo taken, but it's usually more or less for vanity reasons, not because they think that I'm gonna I'm gonna mischaracterize anything or not, or they don't trust me. For the previous 5 years to that, I had been in the community a lot, my community at other protests, taking pictures and documenting what was going on and stuff like that. So everybody, for the most part, may not know me personally, but they knew of me and knew, I'm not there to distort things, which is not always the case with some media. So.
Sure, and you're coming from a local perspective. You're not one of these protest tourists that just kind of go from city to city
right.
around the country, posting stuff on social media.
I've never been to any other city's protest. I'm born and raised in Indianapolis, so what goes on here is my business, and I think to a certain extent elsewhere, but I'm not going to go around the country doing this.
Being part of the community.
Can I jump in too? When you and I were talking about this, you also talked about should I step in? Sure. That you also talked about that there were images that you didn't want to share and didn't want to publicize, either to avoid making people kind of into targets and putting the focus all on one person, or because there were emotions that you didn't think were right for sharing.
Yeah, I would say particularly not as much in this case, but during the actual riots that happened later on, I left my big camera at home and I didn't pull it out. I didn't want to be tempted to take some really amazing photos of craziness going on and then have them used in court. That was my biggest fear, and I saw other photographers that did stuff like that, and for me, it doesn't fit my values to do something like that. When I'm very much a part of the social justice movement myself. Also, when they painted the Black Lives Matter mural on Indiana Avenue, there was pictures. Many of the people that had been killed by police in Indianapolis, their families all came out. And I remember them taking the tour, and I took some pictures, and when I went back and looked at them, I felt like it was just too much of a personal moment with that, some of them out there with their families. Michael Taylor, who was killed by police in the back of handcuffed in the back of a IMPD police car in 1987. His mother was out there and his brothers, and I just didn't feel comfortable posting that picture of a deeply personal moment like that without at least talking to him, and I just didn't think it was necessary.
I'm curious about some of this stuff. I'd like to touch on some of the other people. I'd love to have you stay with us if you're good for everything. One thing that I've talked about, because there's a lot of issues around privacy now, because in Lange's time, a lot of times it could be weeks before images were printed. They might not be distributed for months, and people didn't know you can find people, but now you can find people. So one, is that a thought while you're deciding what or what not to post? And then kind of secondary to that is I'm curious about, what do you think about the time aspect of it, as far as like having this immediacy of like, somebody's life was taken, and then the family is grieving, and then deciding, I have this photo, but I don't want to post it because it's still so fresh. Is that something you could see, in the future, in like 10 years or 20 years time passes, maybe wanting to share some more of that kind of stuff, so it's not so like, could that weigh into any of the?
I think the last one you're touching on, that weighs into it. I think sometimes there is a time when things are more appropriate, and it also is based on a conversation with people. Like, are you ready for something like that to be posted? would be, the first thing, and maybe if not ever for some people. I think when it comes with street photography, I've looked up all the laws on that to make sure that I don't get myself into trouble. And generally speaking, anything that's in public domain where it's in public and they expected it was public, it is completely lawful. Now, with that, I try to go, abide by a code of ethics and make sure, first of all, that what I'm taking a picture of and how it's presented is actually what's going on. Because there's plenty of cases where pictures don't always tell the full story, and you can give people the wrong impression by taking it at a certain time. So, that's one of the things. I think, all photographers have to be, hopefully they're thinking about ethics with that, because the law says one thing, but it's also about, your personal reputation. What do you want to be known for? Yeah. And do you want people running from you? Good people. If you got bad people running, that's different. But if you got good people running from you as a photographer, that says more about you than it does about them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's something that all of us, we have 4 contemporary.
Yeah, let's take a quick look. I'll stay back here by the camera.
Okay,
You can, let's just do a little introduction about everybody here.
Yeah. So Josue Rivas is based out in Portland. He's Mexica and Otomi, 2 native groups from Mexico. And he shared with us this image from the Standing Rock protest in 2016. 2 of the people in this image are Indianapolis natives, which is crazy.
I see him.
Gio and his brother right there, which is a crazy coincidence. But since we were talking about ethics, that was one of the things I really enjoyed discussing with Josue and his perspective on it. He spent a lot of time out in Standing Rock, and he says, I think I even have this quote in here, maybe, of the click of a camera shutter shouldn't be the start and end of a relationship. He wants to be, and all of the photographers that I talked to really were careful in the language that they used and how they approached photography. So even taking photographs or shooting photographs was language that they tended to avoid, and they spoke more about co-creating photographs with the people in the images. Rather than this kind of violent extraction, exactly.
Yeah.
And what was great about one of my favorite quotes from him is he asked, what if Migrant Mother had a TikTok? What if we could give that baby a camera? What would they say? And now technology lets us do that with that immediacy, and we don't have to rely upon these sort of exclusive paths of distribution. People are able to speak for themselves. And so as a photographer, he really has to kind of place his art at the service of the people and kind of amplify what they want to say. He photographed some of the Black Lives Matter protests in Portland and talked about how he went out to the protests for a week without his camera and just looked around and said, what's going on? What do people need? How can I be of service? What is my role in this? And waited and watched and listened before participating.
And let me say this while we start to move over to the other people we have here. I think I'm hearing a lot of photographers now. I feel like I come from a journalism background. And let's see, I'm on Naya here.
All right. Okay.
And then I'm not sure if I can. I come from a journalism background, and there's always a lot of talk around. You can come in here too. There's always a lot of talk around being a fly on the wall, being candid, not getting involved, being this very objective point of view, you're almost removed from things.
Yeah.
But I feel like I hear a lot more contemporary documentary photographers. A photographer I like a lot is Keely Rien. He's a indigenous Chinese American photographer, does a lot for National Geographic and documenting a lot of indigenous cultures around the world. And I've heard him say, there's no fly on the wall. Like, I'm here,
Yeah.
I'm a part of things, and so I, become a part of the community. And even though I am, he says, he is an indigenous person, every culture is different.
Yep.
So just because he maybe has a perspective that's helpful, he still is aware of that and works to, like, he says, I'll play with the kids, or I'll help,
Yeah.
a lot of hunting culture, I'll help, clean the
Clean the carcass.
and be a part of it, and before I start doing that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
too, I'd be interested, Wildstyle, in your kind of feelings about that sort of topic.
Yeah, I think, in order to be a fly on the wall, people have to be used to you being there. And so, I think journalism photography, is different. And I think it's definitely has its own code for certain reasons. But the type of documentary type, like, people do need to know you. They need to be able to trust that, okay, I'm just going to be myself, because somebody that you don't know or trust, that's not a fly on the wall. Like, that's somebody that can injure you later. And so people are going to act different. You're not going to get the real story.
They're going to be more closed off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you want to give us an intro to
Yeah, Tanaya. Yeah. Well, and maybe can I talk about just this section in general? And as a reminder, we're here at the Changing Views exhibition, the photography of Dorothea Lange here at the Eiteljorg Museum. So this exhibition is the vintage prints, the prints from the 1930s, as part of a traveling exhibition. So it sort of came to us here at the Eiteljorg kind of pre-packaged. But we knew that we wanted to make the connection to contemporary photography and not let that sort of sit in the past. And so when we were talking about identity, I think each one of these photographers talked about how their identity influenced the images that they took. But I think it's also too easy to let those photographers from the 1930s sort of escape without talking about how their identity influenced them as well. Dorothea Lange was pretty upfront about the fact that she felt like as a woman she could enter spaces and see things that the male photographers couldn't. The fact that she had a limp influenced how slowly she kind of entered into these situations that forced her to kind of chit-chat, and she would let the kids play with her camera and have these conversations. Walker Evans is one of the contemporary photographers. He was photographing tenant farmers on land that his own family owned. So like everybody has an identity in a way that they relate to the world around them, and to claim that you can kind of completely separate that, I think is artificial, right? And so all of these photographers are kind of engaging more explicitly in how their identity relates to the art that they are creating. So Naya McKnight is of mixed Lakota, Anishinaabe, and Scottish descent. She was born and raised in Los Angeles. And so her identity was really shaped, or her experiences were really shaped by this sort of indigenous urban experience, right? She didn't grow up in her ancestral homelands or on the reservation or kind of with that Lakota or Anishinaabe culture surrounding her. It came through the influence of her mother and her grandmother. And so she's kind of been seeking out, she's a documentary photographer, also teaches high school, teaches photography classes. And so she kind of has been seeking out other women who have had those similar experiences. So she took this kind of portrait of Janae Collins and some kind of memorabilia of her son. Janae had sent her son, Janae is Dakota and Crow, and has a teenage son that she had sent to Montana for the summer to kind of allow him the opportunity to connect with his family and his ancestors. And so they were talking about, the sacrifice and love involved in choosing that separation. And so that was the photo that Naya shared with us.
That's very cool. And I should mention too that because we're looking at contemporary photographers, you can find everybody on Instagram.
Yes.
You can find a lot of people have other programs that they're a part of, and you can really delve more deeply into
Yes.
the work online too.
Yes. And then the last is Marian Hia Kang. She was born in South Korea and immigrated to the U.S. In her early teens, I think, with her family. And one of the things I love about her story is she started for 4 years as a wedding photographer. You know, gotta earn that bread somehow. So I love that like inspiration that she has jumped into documentary photography. She talked about a big turning point for her was going to an award ceremony for photographers, and she noticed that all of the pictures of Black and brown people in those that were winning awards, it was all like suffering and hardship and loss. And so she really felt compelled to share different perspectives of joy and community and celebration. She spent 4 years, actually these pictures, one is from 2010, one is from 2014. She spent at least 4 years kind of traveling back and forth with this community. And she talked about this, the community, the immigrant community she was focusing on is Bhutanese-speaking Nepali people. You know, she's not Nepali herself, but she felt some similarities, or she understood some of the challenges of adapting to life in the United States as an immigrant particularly. And so shared and tried to share in the joy and the experience of kind of creating new roots in a new land.
It's interesting to me that we can be so far in, 23% of the way through the 21st century. There's still a lot of people feeling like, people of color are not represented in a diverse way. It's more struggle-minded. A tougher thing with that. I'm gonna, maybe you can talk a little bit about, because, one thing I want to bring into this too is, there have been even groups around, like the Kamoinge Workshop is a group that was founded in the middle of the 20th century in New York, a group of Black photographers trying to address that issue of, saying we want to be represented more like we live in real life and not this kind of like struggle and poverty mindset. And we're still facing that. So I want to move, but then maybe can you talk, Wildstyle, about how does that sort of thing, is it top of mind when you're photographing?
Most definitely. I think part of the, one of the big reasons that I started in hip hop photography was it was mostly Black and brown people that were performing, and the only way it was going to get any type of attention from a professional photographer would be if somebody got shot or stabbed or something like that. And so I realized, like, if I'm gonna capture like, Black joy and cultural moments like that, that's my calling. Also, even in my impetus about community events in my neighborhood, again, if somebody gets shot out there, they'll stick a camera in your face if you could walk out of your house to see what's going on. But when people are having block parties, when people are taking care of each other and their families are out there together, there's nobody usually there to take pictures like that and show that's going on, in low-income Black neighborhoods either. So
let's step out here and we'll do another. I'm gonna kind of get you in the spot here. If you can come out a little bit, and I'll come out and we'll talk here for a second. Let's even go back just a little bit. I'm gonna try to see what I can see here. I'm gonna give another quick reintroduction. A lot more people jumping in here.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah, thanks. I'll kind of hold this for a second. So we're here at the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis, and we're talking about the new Dorothea Lange exhibit. There's some contemporary components as well, and looking at some modern photographers and some of her contemporaries as well. So, we've got Dr. Jessica Nelson here, and Wildstyle Paschall is a local photographer here in Indianapolis doing a lot of documentary and social justice type of work. So we're going to view some more of Lange's work here and talk a little bit more about some of the implications of documentary photography. I want to move over to that picture I was saying that I love over there. And so I want to build a little bit more again while we're walking on what you were saying. So when the protests and the struggles come out, that's when kind of the major media comes out. And so, and those are things, you know, you're covering as well, but that daily experience is also something that you're interested in and working to do. So how does that, what are some ways that everyday experience kind of manifests for you, like that you're showing?
Well, I mean, particularly in my neighborhood, like we have so many neighbors and people that are always throwing events, you know, for our community. There's a lot of pride. My neighborhood's over 100 years old, and has, you know, my neighbor has lived in her house since the 50s before the highway came through.
Okay.
And so, you know, that is often not, you know, shown. Like they're not going to show her out and about. But the news cameras have been on our block plenty of times for, you know, anything else. If there's violence, if there's something bad going on, they're there. But they're not there, you know, to show community, you know, as we see it, you know, which is us interacting in peaceful and loving ways with each other. So that's, you know, definitely part of, you know, my whole entire reason of getting into photography with hip hop was to show that this was, you know, this is a community.
Yeah.
You know, people are passionate about what they were doing. A lot of people would have their, you know, half of their family out there.
Sure.
This, on TikTok, we're in tight on this photo,
Okay.
and on YouTube here, I can see this whole wall. So we've got, so something else I want to talk about, and maybe I'll kind of introduce this, and then I'll ask both of you to talk about this as well. One of the things that really strikes me about Lange's work is that really sets her apart from her contemporaries is just, I mean, it's so artistic and this technical. Now, they were all technically very great photographers, but to me, this is something that, I don't know, I just connect with her work on an artistic level as well. And there's a lot that can be said for, you know, and this is just really one of my favorite prints. I mean, the contrast is fantastic, and the way that, you know, the arm, the hand comes right in, and you're seeing, you know, every photographer loves to photograph hands, but the fact that you're getting the hands and the person's face, and they're still kind of hidden. There's a little bit of mystery there, so maybe that means they could stand in a little bit more as representative of, you know, people who were, well, this is migratory cotton picker, Eloy, Arizona, 1940. So now I think this brings up an interesting topic as well, as far as, is there a problem with making art out of difficult situations? Is there ethics to that? I mean, my personal opinion is that it makes people sit with it longer. It brings it more to their attention. You know, I think most of the criticism I hear comes from people who are outside of the photography community. They don't really understand that the goal isn't to make something. I hear people who don't come from the photography community talking about kind of using the people to create art. But I feel in an ideal situation, it's kind of a mutually, you know, beneficial thing. So I don't know, I've gone on long enough about this. Maybe both of you can kind of give some input.
I think the best way to address it is the quote there by Dorothea Lange: the good photograph is not the object. The consequences of the photograph are the object. And with that, you know, when people are the focus of it, and it is artistic, it's often, you know, what are the consequences? Did you affect change? Did you help, you know, especially if it's trauma related or something of that nature, did you help prevent this from happening to other people? And, you know, if your goal was to make art to put in a photography book with no consideration of how the pictures are going to be used, then yeah, I think that's an issue. But, you know, with Dorothea, she had a purpose, and they used her work to pass New Deal legislation to help address poverty in the U.S. And so it was art after the fact, but it was, her original purpose, which she succeeded at, was helping people.
One of my favorite things about going live, especially on TikTok, is we get great comments from really funny usernames. So Pizza with Refried Beans says that's a good insight. The subject of the photo is not necessarily the object. And also that photography can humanize a difficult scene.
Yeah.
I think that's what we know as photographers and people who are also consuming documentary photography from this perspective know that that's the goal of work like this, is to get humanized. And
can we walk over and talk about her Japanese?
yeah, let's do it.
I feel like that's perfect, Rich.
I'm going to come in close on this,
okay,
and then move over that way.
Perfect.
So I just want to show, and again, I'm not sure would this have fallen in her FSA? I think it.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so this is part of the FSA. So most of these photos you can see, if you want to get, if you can't get to see a nice big print like this, you can go onto the Library of Congress or the National Archives and download high resolution of a lot of these images. And for me, it's just a fantastic way to, connect with these on a deeper level when you can see the details, you can see textures, you can see, a person up close and what's going on there. So yeah, let's move over this way. And we're going to talk about Lange's work with the
War Relocation Authority and sort of early World War II, the relocation, the internment and incarceration of Japanese and Japanese American folks. Learning about this aspect of Lange's work really helped me contextualize and understand a lot of her Great Depression era photography as well. I think she was more progressive than people realize nowadays. Maybe about a third of the photography that she produced for the FSA focused on the experiences of people of color, but none of those were widely circulated. She had, she sent her negatives off to Washington, D.C. They chose which images to use to circulate. And so her sort of approach to racial equality was kind of erased through that process. And once again, and a similar story with her images of people of Japanese descent, Japanese Americans. So she was hired by the War Relocation Authority to document the process of the implementation of removal orders for Japanese people and Japanese American people. And so she, which was surprising, it doesn't make sense that she was the one hired, because people should have known that she was a little bit, that she was opposed to this. She was one of very few, actually, white people who was actively speaking against this. Her husband, Paul Taylor, was on a committee at Berkeley opposed to it. But I think they just kind of knew, she was a photographer who had worked for the government and made some propaganda for us, and maybe she'll do it again. But what she did differently is she started the story earlier than they really realized, maybe. She began by photographing Japanese and Japanese Americans in their neighborhoods, where they were working, where they were living. I love this Pledge of Allegiance image of the children in the multiracial public school pledging loyalty to the flag of the United States. And then she documented sort of the process of removal and had a very sympathetic eye to the experiences of people in those internment camps and incarceration camps. With that, and so unsurprisingly, the photographs technically weren't censored, but the government just sort of sat on them, kept them all in a drawer in the National Archives. There was some circulation of them in the 1960s and 70s. She literally smuggled some negatives out. She was supposed to turn all of her negatives over to the government, to the officers in charge of the camp. She got a couple of them out. But there wasn't a whole lot of attention to them until kind of the 1990s, early 2000s. And even there's still some books coming out, available in our gift store, for example, that highlight her work in this particular area.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that I wasn't familiar with these photos coming out of journalism school. I was familiar with her work broadly. I mean, I graduated from college in 2004, so I feel like it was even a few years after that where they started being widely circulated. And like you said, I mean, they were only actively suppressed during the war, but then they were available in the archives, but nobody really knew what they were about. And to me, you know, looking at her whole body of work, I feel the most looking at these images because it really personalizes these experiences. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of images, not just from inside the camps themselves, but you know, the businesses of the Japanese Americans, and you know, just you get a little taste of it back here. Just suitcases and suitcases piled on top of each other as hundreds of people are preparing to leave behind everything, you know, that they had ever known. And I think so much of this is so important for accountability, to know the experience that people felt. I mean, and again, the images are so beautiful. There's this really, it pulls on your heart a bit. I mean, this photo, the whole photo, I mean, this is like 1/3 of the photo. It goes on over this way, and it goes on over the other way. And it's just this like beautiful mountain scene with these amazing clouds. And it almost looks just like a camp, like some sort of camp or like a military base that you're showing. But then when you know the context of it, these are people that were forcibly removed from their homes and had everything taken away from them and were forced to live and work in these camps. And I mean, they were there for years. It's not a case of like, we're going to check things out. You got to stay here while we check things out for a month or two, and then it's back to your home. I mean, they were there. That's where they lived.
And no, I mean, Lange herself in an interview in the 1960s talked about how this decision, you know, it had nothing to do with somebody's political affiliation or, you know, what they were doing, if there was active, you know, support for the Japanese side in World War II in any way. It was just, she said, literally the blood flowing through your veins is the only thing that caused a person to be sent to these camps. Photography-wise, I would encourage people to seek out Ansel Adams, also took photographs at Manzanar. He was not so actively opposed to Japanese relocation, and he has a very similar image to this one. The perspective is like higher, I guess. There's less of the foreground. It's a day when there's not a dust storm and there's no people. So you just see like beautiful mountain range, American flag, nice, clean, orderly buildings. You don't get any sense of suffering. Whereas here, you know, you see these two figures trying to kind of escape the dust storm. And you see the harshness. You see the beauty of the landscape, but the harshness of the realities that they were facing in a way that, in that particular moment, Ansel Adams didn't engage with.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in seeing, I'm working on a little background research on an upcoming post about, there's a photographer named Jack Muro. Was a Japanese American who was in one of the internment camps, and he was able to get a camera in there. He had dug out a darkroom underneath his bunk and took photos and printed photos. You know, he'd sneak the film into the washroom to clean the prints, and so I'm interested in you know, learning more about that and talking about him. So you know, stay tuned for some more info on that. We've got just a few minutes. If you can hear the background, the museum's starting to open up here. I know there's some school kids and people. I think, you know, we've got maybe about 5 minutes or so. We could do, I look at just a few more of her post-war things there. And
so she did, her health declined in the 1940s, actually probably as a cause of her childhood polio. She had eventually died of cancer in her early 70s, I believe. But she was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship actually before World War II broke out.
Oh yeah, can I ask about that?
yeah.
I remember hearing about she had gotten the fellowship in 1941.
Yeah.
Then Pearl Harbor happened.
Yep.
And she turned down the fellowship.
She asked to pause it.
So it was just delayed. So she still did do it.
She never completed it.
Okay.
That's her health struggles kind of cropped up again, and she was just never able to return.
I wondered
directly
what happened with that afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although she kind of returned to similar themes, this is one. This is an image from Utah. The Guggenheim was to document sort of rural religious communities and their response to changing economic conditions. And she did go back and do a series for Life magazine on Mormon towns in Utah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So yeah.
I'm realizing, seeing these, I really haven't seen much of her work after World War II.
Yeah. She photographed women in particular. There was a book published posthumously called Dorothea Lange Looks at the American Country Woman. This photograph from Ireland was also on assignment for Life magazine.
Okay.
And she began, her husband, Paul Taylor, was a sociologist and kind of became an economic consultant. He traveled internationally, so she accompanied him.
This is a very interesting
It's one of my
I've never
favorites.
seen this before.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
She very much understood the impact of changing economic conditions. Her husband was kind of opposed to sort of large-scale agriculture and saw the ways in which the mechanization of agriculture was putting people out of work. But also she saw this picture, and then there's another one somewhere in here about, it's on the other side, about the construction of like a dam that was going to provide a water source for farmers, but also actually flood a town and like displace everybody.
Wow.
So she had a very keen eye for the impact of those kind of technological changes on the landscape and how it made life more difficult for people trying to earn a living off of the land.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the crazy juxtaposition here of the cars arriving, the newly manufactured cars, and then just the junkyard in the foreground of what consumption can do.
This is a beautiful image as well. The
Yeah.
print, it's a beautiful print.
Yeah.
Now, are these, so the prints that we're seeing,
Yeah.
when were the prints made? They're all made from the original negatives and everything?
Yeah, Michael Mattis and Judith Hochberg are a married couple that collect, their specialty is vintage photography.
Okay.
So we don't know for sure if Lange herself developed these, created these specific prints, but we know that they were made kind of at the time that the photograph was first created. And with sort of the technology that would be available at that time.
Yeah.
They have a very careful eye in their collection for that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's so well done. I feel like that's another thing a lot of early documentary photographers, doing photojournalism with a big, camera that you've got to have on a tripod.
Yeah.
Or going into areas that were, darker. There's a lot of motion. You don't have as many of these like beautiful, like technically very gorgeous prints like that.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Good. I think, considering we're coming up on this being flooded, I think maybe we could do like an outro here.
Sure.
I'm gonna turn so we can all kind of go on here. I think this camera looks so close. Did I zoom in? That's all the way up. All right. Well, we're not all going to be on the TikTok stream, but we can all be seen on
YouTube.
YouTube one here. Here, I'll come in the
Yeah.
center here, and we can kind of. So I just want to say thank you so much today to our guests here. I appreciate your time and giving your expertise here and sharing some thoughts and opinions on documentary photography. Again, Dr. Jessica Nelson and Wildstyle Paschall. So if I want to direct people towards more of your work, what's the best thing? You just kind of do stuff everywhere?
Everywhere. Wildstyle Paschall on Facebook and all 317 Hip Hop on Instagram. You'll be able to find at least how to get to everything.
Yeah. And so what I'm going to do is I've been broadcasting on both TikTok and YouTube. This whole thing is going to go up on YouTube. In fact, once I sign off and turn it off, it starts uploading right away. So if you want to go back and see, you know, maybe what you missed earlier on, if you're just here now, in the description, in the comments, I'll leave links to everything. I'll leave some links to your stuff. I'll leave links to the exhibit. And feel free to ask any questions on there, anything further you want to know, and I'll keep an eye on that and answer comments. And I'll be making some short form videos of some of this stuff so you can get some more of this everywhere. So this has been great. I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot of new things about a photographer that I thought I knew a lot about. So I'm very excited about that. So thanks so much, everybody, and thanks for watching. And we'll have more live content, photo walks, things like that coming up here soon. So thanks so much.